Ready to dive into an astonishing discovery beneath a dusty Oklahoma farm? Imagine a lonely security guard who only wanted to build a simple fence, but ended up uncovering a hidden subterranean chamber brimming with futuristic machines, a swirling energy field, a mysterious family legacy, and three unlikely heroes racing against time. These elements collide in a story so captivating, you'll be on the edge of your seat. If you love intriguing tales that mix everyday struggles with mind-bending secrets, this one's for you. Stick around to hear the entire journey from humble fence post to a world-altering revelation. Trust me, you won't want to miss how it all ends. And while you're here, be sure to hit that subscribe button to support the channel and stay updated on more incredible stories like this. Every subscription helps us continue bringing you stories that inspire, surprise, and make you think. So, get comfortable because once you start listening, you'll be hooked until the very last line. Howard Lane was 58 years old when he finally decided he had endured enough of the noisy, crowded streets of Chicago. After 3 decades of working as a graveyard shift security guard, all he wanted was a small slice of the American heartland where he could spend his days in peace. So when he stumbled across a listing for a 5-acre plot in rural Oklahoma at a tax auction selling for the unbelievably low price of $500, he pounced. Friends told him it was a crazy gamble, but Howard didn't care. He was tired of punching a time clock and dealing with the endless swirl of people. What he craved was the quiet rustle of wind through tall grass, the chirp of crickets at dusk, and the satisfaction of building something with his own hands. When he first drove onto his new land, though, the reality proved more daunting than he had imagined. The property was parched and stubborn, the soil dry as bone, the grass an anemic yellow, and the only structure in sight was a battered old windmill that looked like it might topple in a strong gust. Howard rolled to a stop, stepped out of his second-hand pickup truck, and shielded his eyes from the sun. It wasn't exactly picturesque farmland, more like the sun-baked skeleton of farmland that had lost all hope. But he smiled anyway. After all, he told himself, this was his. No manager, no landlord, no neighbors for miles. He could be the master of his own destiny here, or at least enjoy the illusion of it. A single wide trailer, faded blue from years of use, served as his makeshift home. He parked it near the windmill and spent a sweaty afternoon wrestling a generator into position so he could have some basic electricity. That first night, alone under a blanket of unfamiliar stars, Howard allowed himself a glimmer of optimism. He would wake up early, he vowed, and begin the slow work of reclaiming this dusty patch. Yes, the soil was poor, the old well was questionable, and the August heat was relentless. But he had time, a modest pension, and a stubborn streak that wouldn't let him walk away just because it was difficult. In his mind, he pictured a garden of tomatoes, peppers, and maybe a few rows of corn. There would be a fence circling the perimeter, something symbolic of boundary and ownership. A fence that said, "Here's the line, this belongs to me." It was almost funny how important that idea felt. After so many years of guarding other people's buildings and property, Howard wanted to be the one calling the shots. It wasn't that he craved complete solitude. He had a daughter, Rebecca, who lived out in Phoenix, and he called her once a week. But he ached for a quieter life, one where he could grow his own vegetables, tinker with small projects, and watch the sunset from a rickety porch chair. Little did he know, though, that under that seemingly worthless dust lay an enigma older than human memory. A secret that would derail his simple retirement dream and thrust him into a role he never imagined. All he had to do was try digging one more fence post hole in the punishing Oklahoma sun. That single, mundane action would change not only his life, but potentially the fate of the world. 2 weeks into this new chapter of his life, Howard rose at dawn, fueled by cheap instant coffee and a sense of determination. Armed with a shovel, a post hole digger, and a handful of cheap metal fence posts he'd managed to buy on sale, he walked the perimeter of his property, mentally mapping how he'd install his fence. He'd already sunk 3 posts near the trailer, each one requiring almost an hour of effort. The ground was so rocky and compacted that his shovel bounced back whenever it hit a stubborn layer of clay or stone. Yet he pressed on, sweat darkening the brim of his old baseball cap. He worked his way clockwise around the property, determined to finish a full boundary over the next month. He had, after all, plenty of time and not a whole lot else to do. His social interactions amounted to a weekly supply run into the nearest town, Elmer's Creek. Population of maybe 500 if you counted stray-dogs. He'd buy groceries, pick up mail, sometimes grab a burger at the diner if he felt like treating himself. Occasionally, he'd chat on the phone with Rebecca. Though they'd been estranged for a while, she worried about him, but he'd insisted he was fine. That morning, the sun felt even more aggressive than usual. By 9 o'clock, the temperature was already in the mid-90s. Howard paused to wipe his brow, deciding he'd plant just one more post before taking a break for water. He picked a spot near an old patch of land that looked like it might once have held a shed or a small barn. Rotten timbers and broken boards littered the area. As he jammed the sharp spade into the ground, he felt the reverberation ricochet up his arms. Most days, that simply meant another rock or boulder. Today, it sounded distinctly hollow, curious. He dug around the spot, clearing away loose soil and bits of debris. His shovel struck something that felt solid and curved, not like any natural stone formation he'd encountered so far. Howard knelt down, using his gloved hands to brush aside the dirt. A large, circular disc of dark stone slowly emerged. It was about 4 feet in diameter, smooth yet etched with faint spiral patterns that his fingertips could barely detect. The designs reminded him of something ancient, the kind of markings you might see on a Native American petroglyph or in a museum exhibit about long-lost civilizations. His heart pounded. He told himself not to get carried away. Maybe it was just an old well cover or a piece of farm equipment. But the more he touched it, the more he sensed it was something else entirely. There was a seam around the disc, suggesting it might be a lid of some kind. An uneasy thrill ran through him. He had no illusions of hidden treasure. He was too old for pirate fantasies, but this felt significant. He considered calling the local historical society or maybe the county records office. But then he remembered how the board clerk at the J station had warned him that land's cursed. Old man, nobody's grown a thing there in 80 years. Howard snorted to himself. Cursed if it was truly cursed. He already had enough real-life problems. He didn't need a haunted farmland. 2. Still, something in him resisted the urge to walk away. Instead, he grabbed a crowbar from the truck and tested the seam, feeling a slight give under his leverage. That was all it took. The lid shifted with a soft groan, and a rush of cool air shot out, carrying with it the scent of damp stone, without meaning to. Howard whispered aloud, "What on earth?" A moment later, the disc slid open, revealing a dark shaft descending into the ground. And in that moment, Howard Lane's life ceased to be ordinary. 1,000 thoughts competed in Howard's mind as he peered into the shadowy depths. The opening was perfectly circular, its inner walls fashioned from what looked like smooth, polished rock. He retrieved a flashlight from his pickup, flicked it on, and aimed the beam down. A spiral staircase of stone led into the darkness, descending in a slow, steady helix. It didn't look like anything that belonged on a battered old farm. Common sense told him to back away, call someone, maybe the police, maybe some archaeologist, but an almost childlike curiosity swept in, overpowering his caution. He was an old man, he reminded himself, with no boss to answer to, and a land deed that had said everything on this property was his. So, with the careful step of someone who knew how easily a man could break a hip at his age, Howard began his slow descent. Each step was sized just right, neither too tall nor too shallow. The air was pleasantly cool compared to the scorching heat above. He could see faint carvings on the walls, the same spiral patterns that ran across the stone disc up top. He realized with growing wonder that this was no random sinkhole or old well. This was some kind of constructed chamber, a place built with precision. The question pounded in his mind, built by who and when? The spiral staircase ended at a small landing, maybe 30 feet below ground. Here, the tunnel opened into a chamber shaped like an octagon. The walls were the same polished, dark stone, but now he could see intricate inlays of what resembled metal, glowing faintly in lines that traced the geometry. At the center stood a pedestal, waist-high, with a concave imprint on top that looked suspiciously like a handprint, though the proportions were slightly off. His flashlight beam danced across the chamber, revealing more of those swirl motifs, each carved with a precision that felt too perfect for human hands. Is this some lost Native American structure, he wondered, but it looked more advanced, almost futuristic. No, he thought, it can't be futuristic. That's ridiculous. Yet a small voice in his head kept repeating that nothing in his world explained this level of craftsmanship, certainly not in some neglected Oklahoma farmland. Carefully, he approached the pedestal. The concavity drew his gaze. Despite his unease, he felt a near irresistible urge to place his hand in it. Maybe it was the same impulse that made children try to fit their footprints into dinosaur tracks at national parks, an innate drive to match shape to shape. Another part of him screamed caution, conjuring images of booby traps or unexplainable energies. But the chamber felt strangely welcoming, heart-hammering. He set his flashlight on the floor, aiming it so he could still see. Then, holding his breath, he pressed his palm onto the stone. It fit more snugly than he expected, even though the outline was slightly larger. Immediately, a soft hum filled the air. The glowing lines on the walls intensified, coming alive in a gradient that pulsed from the floor upward. Howard gasped, jerking his hand away, but it seemed the chamber had already registered his presence. A low rumble resonated through the pedestal, and on the far side of the chamber, a hidden doorway slid open without a sound. Beyond it, darkness stretched into unknown corridors. In that moment, Howard Lane realized that building a fence was the last thing on his mind. The only question was whether to turn around and live with not knowing or keep going. Even as he quivered with adrenaline, he knew the answer. His entire life, he'd stood guard for someone else. This time, he wanted to see things through for himself. Cautiously stepping beyond the newly revealed threshold, Howard discovered a much larger chamber. His flashlight's beam vanished into the gloom, barely illuminating the space. Yet as he advanced, soft lights embedded in the walls blossomed into a gentle, bluish glow, as though responding to his movement. The floor felt perfectly level, and the ceiling soared overhead like a cathedral vault. Lines of luminescent material traced along the walls, converging in complex geometrical patterns that made him think of circuit boards or neural maps. In the center of this vast space, a structure rose from the floor, some sort of ringed apparatus made of the same dark, polished stone. Within the rings, sections of transparent crystal pulsed with swirling strands of colored light. It was reminiscent of high-tech machinery, the sort of thing he'd see in a big-budget sci-fi movie. Yet it stood here, covered in no dust, humming softly, as though it had been waiting for him. Howard inched closer, half expecting alarms or mechanical guardians to lurch into motion. Instead, the space remained calm, albeit pulsating with that faintly alive energy. On a raised platform, a cluster of what looked like control stations spread out in a semicircle, no buttons or screens, just smooth surfaces with crystalline nodes shaped like small protrusions. He hesitated, uncertain how to proceed. He ventured a gentle touch on one of the crystal nodes. Instantly, an image sprang up, a three-dimensional projection of the land above. Glowing in midair, a topographical map showed his trailer, the windmill, the perimeter fence posts he'd installed. His mouth fell open. This wasn't a guess or a generic map. It was an exact real-time model, updated to show even the position of his truck. He staggered back, nearly tripping over his own feet. Calm down. Howard, he told himself, think this through. But his rational mind offered no comfort. He was looking at technology far beyond anything he'd known. Either it was alien, or it belonged to a civilization so advanced they made NASA look like a tinkerer's workshop. Whichever it was, it terrified him. Still, that childlike spark of curiosity glowed brighter than his fear. He touched another node, and the map expanded outward, revealing the surrounding county, then the entire state, then the entire continent. Thousands of pinpoints of light dotted the map, some glowing brightly, others dim. Some seemed interconnected by faint lines, forming a lattice across the globe. All of it told Howard that this was not a one-off facility. The world likely had many such hidden chambers, and they were networked. The big question, why was it under my land? He remembered the rumors about how nobody could grow anything here, how the property was considered a waste. Had that been orchestrated? Had someone or something engineered the land's uselessness to keep people away? If so, how had he managed to be the one who ended up with the deed? The thoughts swirled in his mind. Amid the silent hum of alien machinery or advanced ancient machinery, Howard found his voice. "What is this place?" he murmured. To his shock, the ringed apparatus in the center seemed to pulse in reply, almost as though it sensed his question. He saw a flicker of images in the projection, vague silhouettes, tall shapes with elongated limbs, swirling spiral symbols. He stood transfixed, realizing he might have just asked a question to something that was capable of responding. And he had no clue whether he was ready to hear the answer. His old instincts as a security guard had kicked in, urging him to back off and secure a perimeter. But how do you secure a perimeter against something that could track your every move, map your entire state, and possibly manipulate the environment? His heart hammered, yet he forced himself to think methodically. He needed more light, more supplies, maybe a camera to document this. His cell phone had no signal down here. Of course, but he could still compile photos to show someone later if he could figure out whom to trust. Slowly, he retreated from the central chamber back up the spiral staircase. The late afternoon sun battered him with its blinding brightness. Climbing out of that cool subterranean space felt like surfacing from a dream. By the time he reached the surface, he was dripping sweat, uncertain whether it was from exertion or existential dread. He slammed the stone lid shut for the moment, not wanting to leave it wide open. To his surprise, once sealed, the lid shifted and locked again with a faint mechanical click, as if it had never been disturbed. That alone made him uneasy. Did the system automatically reseal, or was some intelligence controlling it? He trudged back to his trailer, gulped down 2 bottles of water, and tried to steady his shaking hands. This wasn't some dusty relic or an old statue. This was living technology. And it had recognized him in some way. He set his phone to video mode, walked back outside, and documented everything from the top, the circular disc, the seam lines, the swirling pattern, the remote location. He narrated as best he could, though he kept stumbling over his words, uncertain how to describe the underground chamber without sounding deranged. Night fell. Howard stayed awake with the flashlight off, perched in a folding chair outside his trailer, gazing at the stone lid under the starlight. It was quiet, but not tranquil. His mind churned like a heavy machine at full blast, replaying every detail of what he'd seen. He pictured that pedestal with the odd hand imprint, the swirling lights on the walls, the ringed machine, the ghost of some ancient presence that felt as alive as the sky above him. At some point near midnight, he dozed off. In his dream, he saw images of a tall figure with elongated limbs, guiding him through a vast library of swirling lights. A sensation of longing filled him, an inexplicable feeling that he was meant to be there, that he'd been chosen. When he startled awake, drenched in sweat despite the cooling desert air, he realized the dream had shaken him more than the actual discovery. Dawn found him rummaging through the trunk of his pickup, pulling out an old .38 revolver he'd kept from his security days. He wasn't a violent man, but something told him it might be prudent to arm himself. Then he grabbed a larger flashlight, a tripod lantern, a stack of granola bars, and several bottles of water. If he was going back down, he wanted to be prepared for an extended stay. That morning, with the sun hardly above the horizon, he opened the disc once more. Descending the steps felt like crossing a threshold from the normal world into a place where logic bent. He couldn't shake the suspicion that he was not merely stumbling upon something hidden. He was fulfilling a role that had been waiting for him all along. The chamber greeted him with the same faint glow, But this time it felt more intense. The lines in the walls pulsed in a slow rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. The pedestal at the center of the octagonal room emitted a soft light, beckoning him closer. When he set down his lantern and water bottles, he noticed that the glow intensified near his hands. Whatever this technology was, it reacted to him, as if his mere presence fed it energy. The corridor leading to the large hall remained open. He ventured forward, heart pounding. Upon entering, the ringed apparatus once again manifested projections in midair. This time, however, the images were more coherent. He saw shapes that resembled cities on a world map, nodes connected by lines, dates flickering in some unrecognizable script. He stepped nearer to the control stations, carefully running his fingertips across the smooth surfaces, searching for clues about how to decipher it. Suddenly, a part of the projection zoomed in on the southwestern United States on Oklahoma, specifically then on the exact farmland around him. The highlight around his property pulsed, and new text alien characters accompanied it. He sensed that the system wanted to convey a message. But how could he read it? I'm out of my league, he thought, frustration mingling with awe. He pulled out his phone and began recording the projections, hoping maybe someone else, some cryptologist or scientific genius, could decode it later. Then, with a determined breath, he tapped on one of the floating shapes. To his amazement, the lines reshaped themselves, forming a sequence of images, a figure that looked roughly human, a stylized spiral pattern, the same design etched on the stone disk, and a swirling vortex that ended in a flash of white light. The hush of the chamber was broken by a soft, melodic chime. He glanced around and realized that a new pathway had opened on the far side, revealing what appeared to be a smaller, more intimate room. Its walls glowed in a warm amber hue, and at the center stood something he never expected to see in a place that seemed so alien, a wooden desk. Or at least, it looked like wood. Approaching it, he realized the surface was not real wood, but an imitation formed from the same smooth stone. On it lay a thin, leather-bound book, archaic in appearance. Picking it up carefully, Howard discovered it was written in English, old-fashioned cursive, the pen strokes fine and deliberate. The first line sent a shiver through him. To whoever finds this, you share my blood, and therefore my duty. My name is Garrett Lane, and I have served as an observer here since 1907. His breath caught. Lane, my last name is Lane. Could this Garrett be an ancestor he never knew about? Howard flipped through the pages, discovering meticulously written notes about an ancient network called the Architects. There were sketches of the ringed apparatus, annotations about how certain bloodlines had been guided to watch over these facilities, ensuring they never fell into the wrong hands. The final entry, dated 1942, spoke of a vision that foretold the arrival of another Lane decades later, one who would unlock the next phase. Howard's eyes blurred with tears he didn't fully understand. He felt a strange sense of connection, as though a piece of him had been missing his entire life. Is this why I bought this land, he wondered? Was I drawn here clutching the leather-bound journal? He realized that his role was not accidental. There was a legacy in his blood that bound him to this place. Back at his trailer, Howard tried calling Rebecca, his daughter, who lived in Phoenix. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail. He'd never been great at voicemails, so he simply said, "Hey, kiddo, it's Dad. I found something big on the property. Maybe call me when you get a chance." He hesitated, feeling silly for how vague that sounded. Then he hung up. Rebecca was a corporate lawyer with a busy schedule, and their relationship had been strained since his wife, her mother, passed away years ago. But he'd always told himself she was the only family he had left until that old journal suggested otherwise. Reading about Garrett Lane and a bloodline of observers was enough to unsettle everything he thought he knew. He tried to piece together the genealogy. His father had rarely spoken about older generations, and many records were lost or scattered. Could Garrett have been his great-grandfather, or a distant uncle? Why had no one ever mentioned an ancient underground facility in the family tree? It sounded like the stuff of legends, not real life. That evening, restless and unable to sleep, Howard read the journal under the flickering glow of an old lantern. Garrett Lane's words were meticulous, describing how he'd been called to this very spot by dreams and coincidences. He found the chamber, discovered it recognized his DNA, and realized he'd become a caretaker. But the text hinted at a more crucial purpose. When the time is right, Garrett wrote, the network will fully awaken, and new observers will be summoned. We must guide them. Howard also noticed references to others in the bloodline, people scattered across the country, each carrying fragments of this genetic heritage. The phrase observer triad recurred, implying that three individuals with the same lineage were needed to fully unlock the system. 3. He considered himself, perhaps Rebecca, though she'd never shown any inclination for bizarre phenomena. But who was the third? His mind drifted to a second clue hidden between Garrett's lines, mention of a descendant who walks the path of science, and another who walks the path of guardianship. Howard recognized his own life as guardianship. He'd been a security guard for decades, a caretaker of property, always watching out for trouble. But what about the science path? Had the family branched out somewhere, leaving a cousin or nephew tinkering in a lab? Before he could dwell too long, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A stony female voice said, Mr. Lane, this is Agent Nadine Conroy of the Special Investigations Division. We have reason to believe you're in possession of unregistered energy technology. We'd like to speak with you. His stomach dropped. He hadn't told a soul outside, except for the phone's camera footage. Could it be that someone, somewhere, had intercepted signals or detected energy emissions from that underground complex? He tried to stay calm. I don't know what you're talking about. He lied. Maybe you've got the wrong lane. Agent Conroy's voice remained level. We're sending a team to your location. Mr. Lane, please remain on the property. The line went dead. Howard set the phone down, heart thumping in his chest. It seemed the government was onto him, and if they got their hands on this facility, he feared they'd turn it into a clandestine weapons lab. He didn't know who Nadine Conroy really was, but the urgency in her tone told him trouble was coming. He glanced at Garrett's journal, recalling the repeated warnings about wrong hands. Suddenly, the fate of this ancient network impossibly more rested on what Howard Lane did next. He paced the trailer's tiny living area, considering his options. If special agents were inbound, they wouldn't approach politely. They'd come loaded with authority, possibly armed with instruments that could forcibly breach the stone disk. If they wanted, could he hide the entire underground complex? He doubted it. The technology itself might give off signals he couldn't mask. He realized the place might have a built-in defense. The mention of temporal field or dimensional isolation in Garrett's later journal entries stuck in his mind, but the descriptions were vague, hinting at some advanced mechanism triggered by the observer's presence. Could that be the swirling vortex or the ringed apparatus he'd seen? If so, was it really possible to manipulate time around the property? That sounded insane, yet a flicker of hope rose in him. If this ancient technology could hide itself, maybe it had done so for decades, even centuries. The lines about only those who can open the door will find it suggested some kind of cloaking, so maybe it could shield itself from government interference. He decided to go back down, gather more data, see if he could find instructions for this alleged field. He stuffed the journal in his backpack, along with a few more supplies. As he reached the disk entrance, the sun was barely cresting the horizon. In the distance, a thin trail of dust along the county roads indicated multiple vehicles heading his way. He guessed they had arrived within an hour. Quickly, he descended again. The chamber awakened with that welcoming glow. But this time, the main hall displayed new holographic sequences, red icons that felt like warnings, lines tracing from his location outward, as if mapping an encroaching presence. The same symbols from Garrett's journal appeared, and Howard understood the facility had detected outside interference. Rushing to the central apparatus, he touched one of the crystal nodes that, last time, had shown him a map. Instantly, an aerial view of his property flickered into being. 5 dark SUVs were racing toward him, still a few miles out. He pressed the node again, half in panic, not sure what he was doing. Another set of symbols overlay the map, along with what looked like a timer possibly an estimate of how long until the vehicles arrived. Then the apparatus offered him options in a swirling text he couldn't read, but somehow intuitively understood: activate protective field or remain inactive. His breath caught. So it's real. There's a protective field. He slammed his palm onto the node next to the word that resonated in his mind. Activate. A deep hum vibrated through the floor. The ringed machine lit up, the swirling colored lights intensifying. The entire chamber felt electrified, the hair on his arms standing on end. On the holographic map, he saw a translucent dome expanding outward from the center, encompassing his 5-acre lot and a bit beyond. The SUV slowed abruptly, as if encountering a physical barrier. But they didn't stop. They kept moving, albeit at a crawl. He had no idea what the field was actually doing, slowing time outside, speeding it up inside, creating some temporal bubble. But he could see the agents struggling. Their vehicles inched forward, but painfully slowly, as though wading through thick syrup. Howard swallowed hard. This is insane. Yet he felt a surge of relief. He'd just bought himself precious time to figure out the rest. But for how long? Garrett's notes implied that artificial manipulations like this couldn't hold forever. He needed help, and that help, he suspected, lay in the mention of a second and third observer, because one old man alone couldn't possibly handle this tidal wave of responsibility. Howard retreated to the smaller study-like room, flipping through the journal for clues. He found scrawled references to a scientist in the family, someone who would discover advanced principles on their own, someone who might be living right now. Garrett's final entries were cryptic, mentioning that this scientist would unconsciously channel knowledge from the architects, pushing human science forward. He grabbed his phone, opened a dusty old laptop he'd brought along, and used a mobile hotspot from the one bar of reception he could occasionally snag near the windmill. He typed in genealogical sites, searching for traces of the Lane family scattered across America. The name Oliver Lane popped up in a professional article about quantum physics. Oliver was apparently a leading researcher at a private institute in Colorado, focusing on novel quantum communication arrays. Howard scrolled through the article, heart pounding. The text described Oliver as a genius who had, from a young age, demonstrated a knack for bridging theoretical physics and real-world applications. Could that be the man Garrett had foretold? Or was it coincidence he had to take a chance? He jotted down the contact info from the Institute's website. Next, he read deeper into the journal, discovering mention of a third observer, a guardian of the realm of order, as Garrett poetically phrased it, possibly someone in law enforcement or government. Could that be the woman on the phone, Agent Nadine Conroy? The notion rattled him. She was coming to seize this place, not protect it, but maybe she was as drawn to it as he was, in a twisted way. He realized time was short. The protective field might be slowing the approach of the agents, but it wouldn't hold them forever. If Oliver was truly part of this bloodline, they needed to talk. Howard fired off an email to the Quantum Physics Institute. Subject line: urgent family matter. Oliver Lane, explaining in halting detail that he was a relative who needed immediate contact. He doubted it would go through official channels quickly, so he tried searching social media, messaging a handful of accounts bearing Oliver's name or face. His phone rang. It was from a private number. Tentatively, he answered. A young male voice said, "This is Dr. Oliver Lane. You emailed my entire department. Are you some scammer claiming to be a lost uncle?" Howard almost laughed out of sheer relief. "I'm not a scammer. My name is Howard Lane, and I'm calling from Oklahoma. I have reason to believe we share a bloodline connected to something extraordinary." He hesitated, not sure how much to reveal over the phone. "Look, I can prove it if you come out here." "I know this sounds insane," but Oliver sighed. "You said in your message, it's life and death urgent. I'm in the middle of a major project." "Mr. Lane, why would I drop everything and travel hundreds of miles to see a man I've never heard of?" Howard took a deep breath. "Because the technology you're developing, the quantum entanglement arrays, they match something we have here, something that could change everything." He struggled to find words that might captivate a brilliant scientist without scaring him off. And because I think you've felt it your whole life, a pull you can't explain, pushing you toward discoveries no one else can see. Silence on the line, then Oliver's voice. Quieter now, all right? I'm intrigued. But if this is a hoax, I swear to you, it's not. I'll do whatever it takes to prove it. Howard's gaze drifted back to the console, where the SUVs were still creeping closer, inch by inch. Please, come soon. I don't know how much time we have. I'll pay for your ticket. Just get here. Oliver arrived 2 days later, though the concept of days was skewed, thanks to the partial temporal distortion blanketing the farmland. From inside the field, Howard watched as Oliver's rental car crawled toward the property line, then slowed to a near stop just like the government SUVs. Except for reasons not entirely understood, Oliver seemed able to traverse the barrier more easily. His vehicle advanced at a walking pace, while the federal agent's convoy remained nearly frozen 100 yards away, still stuck in the bubble's heavier distortion. Howard jogged up, waving for Oliver to stop. The young physicist got out, looking both fascinated and alarmed at the surreal sight of motionless SUVs. He was tall, lean, with a messy tangle of hair and the weariness of someone who spent more time in a lab than under the sun. "What is this?" he breathed, eyeing the shimmering boundary. "Welcome to your family inheritance," Howard said wryly. Then he gestured for Oliver to follow him toward the trailer, out of earshot if those agents could even hear anything in their slowed state. "I wish I had an easier explanation. It's some sort of advanced field that manipulates time, or so it seems. It recognized us somehow." Oliver turned in a slow circle, his eyes dancing from the boundary to the open land to the stone disk that led underground. "I always suspected. My research suggests that quantum states could be scaled to macroscopic levels under the right conditions. But this is off the charts." He looked at Howard. "You said we share a bloodline. Mind explaining that?" With a nod, Howard led him down to the chamber. As they descended, Oliver's eyes grew wide with wonder at the spiral staircase and the glowing patterns. Once inside, the facility practically leapt to life, the ringed apparatus illuminated with greater intensity, projections forming overhead. Oliver's presence seemed to amplify everything. Howard opened Garrett's journal. "Read this," he said, flipping to the sections describing multiple observers. Oliver scanned the pages, his brow furrowing. "It suggests certain traits in our DNA let us interact with this technology. But that's unbelievably far-fetched." "Right." Yet even as he voiced doubt, Oliver placed his palm on the pedestal's hand imprint. The effect was immediate, his own birthmark. A faint swirl on his wrist he'd never paid attention to began to glow softly, matching the chamber's pulsing lights. "Oh my God," Oliver whispered, staring down at his arm. "This is real." The apparatus responded by displaying an updated map of the southwestern U.S., highlighting two pulses, one labeled H, lane, the other O, lane. Beneath them, lines of strange script ran like data in a status readout. "It's acknowledging us," Oliver said, his scientific mind racing. "It's measuring something in our genetics." Howard stepped beside him, pointing to a third swirling icon. "We need a third. I'm pretty sure it's that agent outside, Nadine Conroy. The journal suggests she's part of the same lineage, but went into government work. The question is, how do we convince a federal agent who's come to confiscate everything?" Oliver frowned at the mention of a government official. "She's stuck out there. Yeah, could we lower the field?" "Let her in." Howard shrugged. "We'd be inviting potential chaos. She might call in backup or worse, blow a hole through the place. But we might not have a choice." The journal warns that the entire network enters a defense mode if all observers aren't properly authenticated. That could mean wiping out advanced technology across the globe, maybe even messing with reality itself. Oliver gazed at the swirling lights, awe mixing with fear. "Then we need her," he said quietly. "We have to bring her in, show her the truth." So they devised a plan to communicate through the barrier, hoping that some kernel of ancestral memory or intangible bond would stir Nadine Conroy to reason. Stepping back up to the surface, Oliver fiddled with a crystalline device he'd found near the control panel. a small, palm-sized object that shifted shape when touched. It seemed to function like a transmitter, though the technology behind it was incomprehensible. Holding it close, he walked to the temporal barrier. On the other side, Agent Nadine Conroy stood, hand raised as if pressing against an invisible wall. Behind her, other agents were effectively motionless, trapped in a deeper layer of slowed time. But Nadine herself moved more freely, though still with difficulty, as if the barrier recognized something in her, too. Olisaver adjusted the device, and a shimmering corridor formed just wide enough for them to see each other without the rest of the agents interfering. Nadine's eyes locked on Oliver, then slid to Howard, suspicion etched on her face. She wore tactical gear, a sidearm at her hip, and an expression that said she was one step away from calling in an airstrike. "Agent Conroy," Oliver called, voice straining. "We need to talk. Face to face." She studied him for a beat, then took a tentative step forward. The corridor seemed to part the distortion like a zipper. The moment she passed through, the swirling effects sealed behind her, leaving the rest of the federal team in their near-frozen state. She advanced, brow furrowed. "Who are you people? And what is that dome?" "I'm Oliver Lane, a physicist," he began, holding his hands up disarmingly. "This is Howard Lane, my uncle. Apparently, there's something unusual about our family, and we believe you share that lineage." Nadine's lip curled in disbelief. "My lineage is well documented. I'm not part of your clan. Mr. Lane, I'm here because we detected a massive, unauthorized quantum disturbance. Now, either you cooperate, or I—" Before she could finish, Howard stepped forward and calmly said, "Agent Conroy, check your left forearm. The inside." He gestured. "You've got a birthmark, right? A spiral shape." Her face twitched, a flash of shock. She recovered quickly, but they'd seen it. She turned her gaze to Oliver. "How the hell would you know that?" Oliver tried a gentle tone. "Because we both have one. Two, something about our shared ancestry. We can't fully explain yet, but if you come inside, see the chamber for yourself, you'll understand." Nadine looked like she might protest, but curiosity flashed in her eyes. "If this is a trick, it's no trick." Howard said, "I'm just an old security guard who bought worthless land, found a door, and realized I'd stumbled onto a legacy older than civilization." He swallowed. "Ma'am, I'd like nothing better than to hand this over and go back to building my fence. But that's not an option anymore. We need you." She exhaled slowly, scanning the surreal scene, the half-finished fence, the motionless SUVs, the shimmering dome overhead. "Fine," she said at last, her posture still tense. "But let's get one thing clear. I'm in charge of my own safety. If this is some cult or a trap, I'll radio my team in." "Understood." They nodded, stepping aside so she could approach the stone disc. Nadine's eyes flicked from Howard to Oliver, then to the disc's spiral etchings. She sighed again and, with a resolute nod, said, "Show me." The disc opened, revealing the staircase down. The last time Howard had descended, he'd been alone and frightened. Now he felt a strange mixture of relief and dread, with both Oliver and Nadine at his side. Three people, he thought, recalling Garrett's prophecy, three observers. For better or worse, they were about to unite. At first sight of the octagonal chamber, Nadine's breath caught. She flicked on her tactical flashlight, scanning the smooth walls that glowed at her approach. The lines of luminescent material seemed to radiate in recognition of her presence, intensifying until the entire chamber was bathed in pale blue. She kept her hand near her sidearm, but the raw wonder on her face was unmistakable. Oliver went straight to the pedestal. "Agent Conroy," he said gently, "place your hand here. I think you'll see something you can't deny." She hesitated, eyeing him warily. Then, with a determined set to her jaw, Nadine placed her palm on the imprint. The pedestal pulsed, and swirling patterns raced along the walls like starlight caught in a net. In that instant, Nadine's birthmark glowed beneath her sleeve, visible even through the fabric. Startled, she yanked her hand away. "What? is that she demanded stepping back. Howard produced Garrett's journal. Your real name might be Conroy, but somewhere in your ancestry, you share the Lane bloodline. He flipped to an entry referencing a third branch of the family, scattered after the Great War. We're certain you're one of us, whether you like it or not. Oliver then led her into the main hall. The ringed apparatus lit up, casting a complex projection overhead, a global map with multiple glowing points. Text, symbols, and shifting lines spun around. 3 particular markers shone brighter than the rest, converging at a location pinpointed in rural Oklahoma exactly where they stood. Nadine tried to maintain her stoic demeanor. This is advanced technology, she said, pressing a hand to her forehead as if fighting a migraine. No, it's beyond advanced. It shouldn't exist. Oliver nodded. It's millennia beyond our current science. We think it was built by a civilization Garrett called the Architects. They left these facilities hidden around the world, accessible only by people with certain genetic markers, people in our family. She glanced at the swirling map, noticing red clusters forming in major population centers around the globe. What does that represent? Howard flipped through more pages in the journal. A global defense system that activates if the facility deems humanity not ready for this technology. It can reset progress, maybe even rewrite reality to prevent a cataclysm. But that would mean the annihilation of countless scientific breakthroughs, entire research branches wiped from existence. Nadine's tactical mind assessed the threat. You're saying this place can do that? Rewrite entire portions of history. Oliver pointed at a specific interface. We suspect it's already begun partial activations in places where quantum research is hitting advanced stages labs in Europe, Asia, South America. If those labs approach a threshold the architects deem dangerous, the system might trigger a timeline correction. The journal calls it a temporal reset. Nadine inhaled sharply, the color draining from her face. Her entire career had been about controlling emerging technologies that threaten national security. She'd never imagined a technology could control time on a global scale. So how do we stop that from happening, she asked, voice trembling with a mixture of awe and determination. Howard placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We authenticate ourselves as observers. 3 of us, from the same blood. We show the system that humanity is ready, or at least worthy of continuing without a forced reset. That's what the journal suggests the network needs us to pass its test. If we fail, we lose it all. Nadine closed her eyes, wrestling with a lifetime of training that told her to seize and contain any threat. Finally, she opened them, looking at Oliver and Howard. All right, she said, exhaling. Show me how. They led Nadine to the ringed apparatus. A swirl of energy rose around it, forming 3 distinct pedestals, each etched with the same spiral design. The overhead projection changed, focusing on the southwestern portion of the United States, then zooming out to reveal the entire planet. In the corners of the projection, countdowns appeared, numbers that none of them fully understood, but which all 3 sensed spelled urgency. Oliver hypothesized that each pedestal was for one of them. We need to stand at these stations simultaneously, he explained, referencing sketches in Garrett's journal. The system will measure our combined intent, or maybe our emotional resonance. I'm not completely sure, but it's definitely geared for 3 operators. Nadine studied the swirling text. Combined intent, this technology reads our minds. Howard gave a small shrug. It's reading something, maybe heart rate, brain waves, DNA signals, or all of the above. The point is, we each bring a different perspective, me, the lifelong protector, Oliver, the scientist, you, the authority figure. We represent different paths of humanity. I guess. A hush settled over them as they positioned themselves at the pedestals. The swirling energy grew in intensity, enveloping each station in a gentle glow. Oliver's expression was determined, Nadine's intense, and Howard's tinged with a quiet resignation, as though he understood this would forever change who they were. When all 3 placed their hands on the pedestals, the apparatus roared to life. An unearthly chorus, part hum, part musical chord, reverberated through the chamber. Streams of light arced between them, connecting each pedestal into a triangular lattice. Howard felt a rush of emotion, memories of his wife, the lonely nights on patrol, the longing for a simpler life. Oliver felt the thrill of scientific curiosity, the puzzle pieces of quantum theory clicking in his mind. Nadine recalled her unwavering sense of duty, the moral lines she'd towed, the sacrifices she'd made to keep the country safe. In that instant, their deepest convictions and vulnerabilities tangled in a single tapestry. The technology amplified these sensations, as if it were reading their souls. Howard glimpsed, in a blinding flash, the essence of Oliver's brilliance, his youthful ambition balanced by a real desire to help humanity. He also sensed Nadine's struggle, the tension of someone who wanted to do the right thing, but often found herself in morally gray territory. For a fleeting heartbeat, he sensed they all recognized the enormity of what they were unleashing. The projection overhead shifted from red to gold, as though the system acknowledged their presence. A voice, or something akin to a voice, reverberated in their minds. Observer triad confirmed. Howard felt tears welling in his eyes. Unbidden, confirmed. It sounded so final. In the center of the apparatus, a vortex of energy took shape, swirling faster and faster until it stabilized into a hovering orb of light. Around the globe, the red clusters on the map dimmed. The countdown halted. One by one, bong. The lights at other nodes changed to the same golden color. Oliver, breath trembling, whispered, "We did it. We stopped the reset." Nadine exhaled a shaky breath of relief. "Then, it's over." But even as she spoke, new symbols materialized across the global map, blue lines connecting continents, luminous threads weaving a network that spanned Earth. Howard stared at it, a chill running down his spine. "No," he said softly, "it's just beginning. The system is fully awake now." And deep in a separate chamber, a portion of the facility they hadn't yet seen, someone stirred in a translucent pod, as though it had been awaiting this exact moment for countless years. 6 months later, the land Howard once thought worthless had transformed into a hub of unprecedented collaboration. Beneath that same Oklahoma sky, the old farm now buzzed with activity from scientists, engineers, environmentalists, and even diplomats, all granted carefully supervised access by the newly formed Observer Council. Howard, Oliver, and Nadine found themselves at the center of a quiet revolution, one that aimed to share and moderate the mysterious advanced technology left behind by the architects. What had begun as a localized temporal field now served as a controlled environment. Experiment storms were tempered, extreme drought was mitigated, and test crops of wheat and soy sprouted in mere weeks. International delegations arrived daily, wide-eyed at the advanced agricultural breakthroughs and the shimmering chamber below that defied human understanding. All the while, a sense of reverence pervaded the place, for they all knew they stood on sacred ground, ancient technology that could either uplift or destroy civilization. Howard, however, found himself missing the simplicity of that first week when building a fence had seemed like the biggest challenge of his day. He still lived in his refurbished trailer, though the council insisted on constructing a more comfortable living unit nearby. He refused to let them tear down the battered windmill or remove his partial fence, saying it was a reminder that sometimes the smallest tasks could lead to the biggest discoveries. Oliver thrived in the new environment. He headed up the research wing, collaborating with top scientists who flocked to the site, each determined to glean insights from the architect's gift. They'd already adapted some of the technology to reduce greenhouse gases in industrial areas, forging prototypes that promised global environmental stabilization. Oliver's eyes shone with a fervor Howard recognized, part scientific wonder, part moral burden. "We can't just hand this out blindly," Oliver would say, pacing the dusty yard. "We have a responsibility to guide how it's used, or we risk catastrophic misuse." Nadine, meanwhile, had resigned from her government post. She now served as an independent liaison between various world governments and the Observer Council. Her skill set, negotiation, crisis management, knowledge of governmental protocols became indispensable. And slowly, a more human side of Nadine emerged. She laughed more often, drank coffee around a campfire with the on-site team, and occasionally let slip stories of her own childhood, hinting at the hidden familial ties that had drawn her here. They all still wore the spiral mark on their forearms, an outward symbol of their roles. Over time, that mark grew more intricate, threads of luminescent lines branching outward like a living tattoo. Howard suspected it was the network's way of ensuring they remained in sync with the technology. Each time one of them touched the pedestal, the interface recognized them immediately. Amid these changes, the facility unveiled new rooms almost weekly, like a living maze that shifted to guide them deeper. And in one sealed chamber, something akin to a stasis pod had begun to glow. Oliver's instruments picked up faint signals, heartbeats, brainwaves, or some unknown equivalent. They realized the architects might not be entirely gone. One day they might awaken, ready to instruct humanity. Howard stood at the threshold to that sealed chamber, the place where a tall, indistinct figure resided behind transparent crystal. He felt a surge of humility. 6 months earlier, he'd been an old man looking for a quiet life. Now he was an observer, responsible for safeguarding an evolutionary leap. For the first time, he understood why Gary had chronicled it all. Someone had to carry the knowledge and pass it forward. It was late afternoon when Howard walked the perimeter of his property, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. That day, a team of researchers from Brazil and Kenya had arrived to study the network's potential for global water purification. Already, they'd found ways to replicate small-scale facets of the architect design in portable units that could turn brackish water fresh within minutes. Across the globe, 26 other nodes once dormant had begun stirring to life, each requiring its own trio of observers with the right genetics and the right moral compass. Picking his way past the line of partial fence posts, Howard paused at the one hole he never finished digging. The post-hole digger rested nearby, rusted at the edges. He smiled wryly. That hole represented the moment everything changed, a tear in the mundane reality of a lonely man. From that hole, he found a subterranean labyrinth and a cosmic inheritance he never asked for. Oliver approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "We've got an update from the Pacific Node," he said, voice brimming with excitement. "They've reversed coral bleaching across 3 major reefs. It's working." "That's fantastic," Howard replied, though he still felt a pang of concern. Each miracle the technology enabled also brought new political disputes, new ethical quagmires. Already, corporations and certain governments were pressuring the Council for exclusive rights to powerful applications. The Observer Council had to juggle transparency with caution, ensuring no single entity monopolized these gifts. Nadine joined them, her arms crossed. The delegates from Europe want a demonstration of the climate stabilization tech next month. They're insisting we run a large-scale trial before they commit to the global accord. Howard nodded grimly. "Let's do it carefully. The last thing we need is to cause a weather anomaly we can't control." She nodded back, then softened. "Also, Rebecca called. She said she's booking a flight for next week. Wants to see how her father became the talk of the scientific world." A wave of emotion overcame Howard. He'd almost forgotten that, in all the upheaval, he never properly reconnected with his daughter. "That's good," he managed. "I'd like to show her what we've done here. Maybe we can mend some fences." Oliver smirked, picking up on the unintentional pun. "Real fences or metaphorical ones?" "Both," Howard said, allowing a small laugh. "Though I'm thinking of leaving this one half-finished, as a reminder, together." They turned their gazes to the horizon, where the shimmering aura of the temporal field lingered, more as a protective measure than a barrier. The domain beneath the earth pulsed softly, in harmony with the beating hearts of 3 observers, each carrying the hopes and anxieties of a civilization on the cusp of transformation. Howard removed his hat, letting the breeze ruffle his thinning hair. "It's funny," he murmured. "I came here just wanting to be left alone. Now the whole world's at my doorstep." Oliver rested a hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone anymore, Uncle Howard. None of us are." Nadine stepped forward, completing their small circle. In the gathering dusk, The old farmland felt alive with purpose. The battered windmill turned lazily, as if nodding approval, and below their feet, an ancient intelligence hummed in tandem with human dreams, forging a future where technology and compassion might, at last, walk side by side. They stood there, the three of them, silhouettes against the sinking sun, farmer, physicist, and guardian, united by blood and by the incomprehensible legacy of the architects. Their journey was far from over, but for the first time, Howard Lane felt certain that the fence he'd started to build was not the boundary of his little kingdom, but a gateway to something far greater. Looking back, I never expected such a life-changing adventure to start with something as ordinary as digging a post hole. Yet that single moment opened a door to ancient secrets, unexpected friendships, and the realization that even the most unremarkable among us can carry an extraordinary purpose. After months of uncertainty, cooperation, and genuine wonder, we found that destiny doesn't belong only to the brave or brilliant, it finds all of us in our own way. But this isn't just one person's story, it's a collective journey. Your thoughts, questions, and opinions are a vital part of it. How would you react if you uncovered a hidden network of unimaginable power? What choices would you make for humanity's future? Join the discussion in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed the ride, don't forget to share and spread the word. Your support keeps these stories coming, and we appreciate every bit of it. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, stay curious.